God. Are you ready?
Yeah.
Okay. Do I do the... Yeah, okay. I do the dawn thing.
Okay.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to our DAWNCast podcast this morning. And I'm really, really thrilled and excited to have Lisa Cox here in the studio with us. Lisa has got an amazing story to share about diversity and inclusion. So it is an honour to have her here, and we're going to launch straight into having a conversation.
Thanks, Di.
Yeah. Look, it's going to be a casual conversation,
Sure.
Lisa, but I'm just really humbled that you reach out to me, to share, or, can you tell me what made you reach out to DAWNCast or to me, and why?
I think it may have been, I received a message from you about DAWNCast and didn't know an awful lot about it. So I spent a lot of time on Instagram, and I think that was how I first got your message.
Yeah.
Maybe a year or so ago, and then we lost touch for quite some time.
Yeah.
And during that time I was working on a lot of projects around diversity and inclusion, and then got back in touch. Because I realised that we had a bit more to talk about.
Tell me why, what drives you around in terms of diversity and inclusion. You talk about your disability.
Mm-hmm.
Can you tell me how, what happened?
Sure, absolutely. So I'll give you the longer version if I can. So
Of course.
prior to my disability, I had a professional background in media communications. I worked in advertising agencies for years. I'd been to uni, got my degrees. Everything was really, really sweet, and then it turned sour really quickly. I had a brain haemorrhage at the airport one morning, so I was just flying home to see my family.
How old were you?
24. And
Right.
Apparently, I don't remember any of it, but apparently I was mumbling my words. They wouldn't let me board the plane, and then I collapsed at the airport. So they took me into hospital. All of my organs shut down. They put me in a coma for 3 weeks. So I was on life support for 2 months. During that time, my family, who had all jumped on a plane and come down from Brisbane to Melbourne, were told they may have to turn off my life support. Obviously, that didn't happen. But what happened next? That's right, came off the life support, stayed in hospital for over a year after that, and during that time, my left leg, all of my toes, and 9 of my fingertips were amputated. I had heart surgery twice and a total hip replacement. So that's all of the visible stuff I suppose you can see, but there are plenty of invisible disabilities and scars. So I'm over 25% blind.
Right.
Because of my brain haemorrhage. My speech has been affected, and epilepsy, concentration, memory, things like that are also affected.
So were you aware, like this brain haemorrhage, I mean, obviously that came out of the blue, like you...
It did absolutely come out of the blue, certainly not what I was expecting at the airport. So Streptococcus A is apparently the, I can't remember if it's a virus or a bacteria, the infection that caused it. Streptococcus A, but it was apparently, according to the medical professionals, a bit of a rare strain, and some people can get those sorts of things and be okay, get a bit sick, but it really went to party on my body.
Oh. I mean, obviously for a few months you were kind of not present here.
No.
And when you came out of that coma,
Mm-hmm.
Do you remember?
Don't remember a thing. Don't remember coming out of the coma. My first memory was approximately 4 months later from the brain haemorrhage. In one of the hospitals in the rehab ward. Now, since then, I'd been in 2 different ICUs in Melbourne, and this was at a ward in Brisbane. So I'd, spent 4 months in and out of hospitals, and that's my first memory of anything really.
Do you recall anything then from your childhood? Like, is there?
I do, and I'm so happy about that, because I've lost roughly a year's worth, 6 months to a year's worth of memory. So don't remember where I was working, living, and things like that. But I still have really silly memories from when I was 6 or even from when I was 21. And I'm really glad those memories still exist.
So you then would recall what it was like growing up,
I do remember very much what it was like growing up, and I obviously grew up without a disability. But
what was that like? Can you remember? What was that life like without a disability?
Without a disability, I suppose I can't imagine what it would be like to grow up with one. There's a whole heap more challenges that you have to overcome. I wrote a piece recently about children with disabilities. There's a little girl who's growing up without her arms and legs, and the point of the article was she is one of the reasons I do so much advocacy now, because as someone with a disability now, I can look back and think, when I was a kid, I felt really uncomfortable with braces and pimples and no boobs and all those things that happen to us as young girls. But I'm not comparing those two things at all with disability. But at least when I looked to popular culture and the media, I saw people who looked like me. There were other white girls on TV who looked like me. So I felt less alone in some ways. But these children, this little girl and children like her growing up without disabilities, when they look to mainstream popular culture, there's nobody like them in any way whatsoever.
And in that period, that when you were, I would say, the normal, physically and everything, were you passionate in the space of diversity and inclusion, or did you just live a normal life, going to work? Obviously you were in advertising agency. I suppose as normal as it can be. Advocacy has always been my blood in some way, though. I used to do a lot of work with women's advocacy. A proud feminist, always have been, but obviously I knew nothing about disability, so I could never speak to diversity and inclusion from that perspective. So in that state, once you've kind of, woke up, you didn't realise you woke up from a coma?
I had no idea what had gone on. Mum, Dad and my family sort of slowly drip-fed me bits of information over time, and it all kicked in. So there were things, for example, they told me that my leg was going to be amputated. I cried my eyes out for days, or for a day. Woke up the next morning, completely forgot. Couldn't remember a thing because of my memory from the brain hemorrhage. So they decided, let's not tell her every day like Groundhog Day. So they didn't tell me for a long time until eventually they told me, and I did remember, and it all happened.
Yeah.
But it's been
why did it have to be amputated?
Okay, so my fingertips, toes and leg were all amputated because when all of my organs shut down, the medication that they put me on was really, really great. It saved my life, basically, brought all the blood back to my internal organs, but it took all the blood from my extremities, so everything turned black, including my nose, but I got to keep that, fortunately, and everything else had to be chopped off.
Right.
Yeah.
What was that like for you? What was that process like? What was going through your mind? Being a woman,
I was devastated at the time, absolutely devastated. And to be honest, I had so many professionals, really, really lovely people with years of experience, and I'm sure they had degrees and qualifications all over their walls, come in and speak to me, psychologists, psychiatrists, to try and help me out. None of them really turned my thinking until one day one of my surgeons organised for a young girl to come in and visit me who was about my age, and she was going to speak to me about amputations and my journey. And this beautiful girl just walked into the room, and I thought, you so-and-so, what would you know about amputation? And she sat down and said, both of my legs had been amputated, my arm, and I was gobsmacked. And so first impressions certainly took me by surprise. Shouldn't judge a book by its cover. But that was the first time in my whole medical journey, so to speak, that my perspective had been changed, and I finally saw some light at the end of the tunnel, that I could continue on as a disabled person and still be functional and happy and all of these things that I wanted to be. And it's been a growing process since then.
So from that moment then, sometimes when you make a decision, luckily, for me, I remember when I first came to Australia, the first decision I made was that I've got to learn how to speak English.
Yep.
Because I couldn't speak English.
Yep.
And unconsciously you have that message in your head, and then obviously whatever you do from then on is about enabling yourself to be able to speak the language so that you can actually integrate better and be successful. So for you, that moment when you said that, what changed you when you met that girl, do you remember what thought process, what you were thinking?
She told me that she'd just come back from London and was studying and doing all of these things, and it was the first time I suppose you never see anybody in the media who's just leading a normal life, doing normal things, either portrayed as being incredibly inspirational, and Sally Young calls that inspiration porn, or really, really tragic. And they were the only two versions of disability that I knew. So to see somebody who was just having a great old time with life, even with disabilities, and she'd been through a terrible time, no doubt. But that was really eye-opening for me. It was great to see.
And so after that, what was your first, once you got released from hospital, and once you got through the process of having your leg amputated and your fingers amputated, where? Sure,
so I was in hospital for over a year, and then the entire time all I wanted to do was get back to work. I loved my job in advertising. I was a copywriter, and I did consume mainstream media, but my childhood was very much ABC, don't read magazines, they're full of rubbish.
Yes.
And Dad was very strict about that, so I hadn't watched a whole heap of commercial television. But during that year in hospital, I watched more TV than I think, and flicked through more magazines than I had in my entire life. So it was during that time I realised there's no representation here, and there have certainly been other disability advocates like Dylan Alcott who have said, I've never seen myself represented in mainstream media, but I felt that as well. But I knew that my one point of difference was that I was in a position to change that given my professional background. So I did return to advertising agencies for a little while, and I was getting work produced, I was getting my scripts approved. It was great, but unfortunately my own invisible disabilities took me by surprise, and I didn't realise that I can't keep up the hours with my fatigue and everything like that. So unfortunately I couldn't continue that any longer. So I was still able to use my background though to create some change in the industry.
But when you mentioned invisible disability, can you elaborate on that?
Sure.
That's first. Secondly, wouldn't have the workplace been able to support you through that, do you think?
To an extent. So the workplace, this particular one, they were wonderful. They were really, really accommodating. But the advertising industry is a bit manic, and you're in there before 9 a.m. and out at maybe 9 p.m. and it's long, crazy hours, which I loved. It was just part of my personality that I really got a kick out of the adrenaline, but it's really not sustainable for me personally. So other people with disabilities can absolutely do it, but just for my own personal situation, it wasn't really viable. And what were some of those issues, or this, in this? Okay, so my concentration and my memory, for example, are all of my invisible disabilities, which I said I would elaborate on. But people when you see me, you'll see my wheelchair, and depending on what I'm wearing, you'll see my scars and my prosthetic leg, and people assume that's the disability, but it's all the invisible disabilities from the scarring on my brain that play a far greater impact on my life than a big wheelchair or a shiny prosthetic leg. And that's the case for a lot of people who have visible disabilities. They play a huge impact in their life, but people either don't notice it, or they're constantly having to justify themselves as to why they're maybe not understanding something as well. And it can be a bit difficult, I think, for the general population to perhaps understand that those disabilities, even though you can't see them, they have huge impacts on people's lives.
I mean, you said that you also learned to talk again.
Yes, that's correct.
I'm
I'm still occasionally a bit bit all over the shop, but originally, when I had all of the life support machines and everything, I had to point at a board of letters and spell out words letter by letter, and that was the only way I could communicate. So the fact that we're here today having a chat is something I'm grateful for.
I know, it's amazing. You know, I was doing an interview, I think last week. It was for a board role, and as we were talking, I said exactly the same thing. But obviously, that disability of mine is different in the sense that I said I couldn't speak English either. And so to me, to sit in front and be, you know, interviewed for a board role for a really reasonably prestigious organisation was quite, you know, humbling. Like
it is a big deal.
It is a big deal, as you said. You know, even though. You know, so I just thought we can to some extent relate to that, being able to talk. How was it for your family to nurse you or to look after you through this process? I mean, learning to speak again and
sure, they
must have.
I can't speak for them, obviously, but I know I would have put them through hell. When things happen to me, I can handle it. But when things happen to my family or my husband or other loved ones, I'm a mess. I just fall to pieces. So I can only imagine if it's the same for them that I really, really put them through a rough time.
But I don't think you put them there. But I think
I'll forever feel a bit bad about that.
No, you shouldn't. You shouldn't. It's not. I don't think you wanted to put them through
no,
it.
absolutely not. I just
it's
know
not something that was intentional.
The first phone call they got was from the hospital in Melbourne to say, we don't think she'll be alive in the morning. Quick, come to Melbourne. So they all jumped on a plane, and my brother was surfing at the time, and he came home in a hurry. So I put through a tough time, but they've been amazing. I mean, I've had some compliments come my way about you doing a great job, but I'm always quick to add that I haven't done it alone. I've had them by my side the entire way, and it's something I'm very grateful for.
And how long was it did it take you to learn to speak again?
I stumbled over words over the months, I suppose, and as slowly things came back to me. But it's still a bit difficult every now and again to get my mouth around words. And in the evenings or at certain times of the day, when my fatigue gets worse and my memory's bad, it's really, really bad and really slow. It's like someone with a thick Scottish accent. You can understand them perfectly when you've been around them for a long time. So my husband understands me perfectly when I'm talking like this. So how long has it been since the accident? Nearly 15 years. So
wow.
It'll be 15 in February.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. And your husband has been through the process with you?
Some of it. So I met him afterwards.
Okay.
And we've been married now for 6 years and together for over 10. So he's certainly been through a lot with me, and he's just a great guy.
Sorry to wake him up early this morning to get
except for that,
yeah. Morning.
No. Yeah, I'm the morning person, not him.
Yeah. So, I mean, we are both passionate about inclusion and diversity. You know, do you believe that Australia overall, you know, is an inclusive culture? Is, you know, celebrating or embracing diversity?
I think we'd like to think we are, but the research and the stats would tell us otherwise. So I can't speak for cultural diversity. That's probably your area of expertise more than mine. But with regard to disability, 1 in 5 Australians, roughly 20% of the population have a disability, but our mainstream media is not reflective of that at all. Not just our mainstream media, but across popular culture. So just use one example, which is a bit different to media, but Australian Fashion Week. There have been disabled models on catwalks all around the world for years, Milan, New York, London, but Australian Fashion Week, still afraid to go there, still afraid to put a disabled model on the catwalk. Now that's only one example, of course, but those principles of fear of inclusion and diversity trickle down into other areas of mainstream popular culture as well. So advertising, for example, when's the last time we saw someone with a visible disability in mainstream popular culture, like advertising? And I say visible disability because I'm sure there are people with invisible disabilities like depression or anxiety in ads. Often, I don't know numbers there, but it's just that invisible versus visible disability thing, having that recognition and having it consistent enough so that it normalises disability in a way.
Yeah, I know. I mean, I think we were talking about this before. It's about, I think, mainstream media or even advertising. I think they would prefer, or they don't think about what they're projecting out to the population. They think that it's that people would like to see normal, as in perfect, looking, blonde hair, blue eyes, and that's it, perfect people. But in reality, as you said, I mean, there's 30% of our population are born from non-English speaking background.
That's correct.
Or have parents who are born from non-English speaking backgrounds, and that in some areas, half of the population are from non-English speaking backgrounds. So it still doesn't reflect on our mainstream
exactly
media.
Right.
It's I suppose in the work that you do and what I try to advocate as well is to try and shift that.
Yeah.
Are you seeing any shift at all, do you think?
In other countries I am. So as you and I discussed earlier, I'm having lots of conversations with people in the US and the UK because that's where there are people who are creating more change. There seems to be less of it happening over here. I am seeing change though, and organisations like Media Diversity Australia, which I'm really proud to be a part of, are doing really great things in the media space, in newsrooms, to make newsrooms and news stories more culturally diverse. So just recently they had their inaugural Walkley's division, the Walkley Awards for Journalism. They had the very first diversity category included. So it's only small, but it's massive in terms of what we're advocating for, because lots of little small changes add up over time.
Yep. What other things? I mean, you also write. You also do public speaking. How are you sensing in terms of people reception to the idea of diversity and inclusion, like when you go and talk to them?
I think, and I'm generalising big time here, younger generations are more accepting of diversity and inclusion and just think if it's no big deal, let's do it. But it's when you get to the slightly older members of the board who, we can't do that, no. Yeah. And I'm generalising, so I don't want to offend anybody, but
that's all right.
Blanket statement, old people are great. I mean, old people are a bit slower to come around, but it's just an accepted part of it's no big deal. Of course, we're going to include people from non-English speaking backgrounds, and it's no big deal to have a disabled person necessarily. So maybe in a generation or two, we'll see more of a consistent change.
Do you find it's hard work? Do you think, like, driving this conversation?
It is. Yeah. There are other people out there doing similar things and having similar conversations. It is a little bit difficult. One, because I'm short on energy these days, but two, because I know I'm one of the few people in Australia doing things like this, and by that I mean there are some really great disability advocates out there who are waving the flag for diversity and inclusion, but having that media background as well. It's just not there. Or from the other side of the coin, there'll be media professionals who are strong advocates of diversity and inclusion but don't have the disability themselves. So it's that middle ground where there's only a couple of us floating around.
Actually, you know what? Now that you mention it, it's exactly like me.
Yeah.
I think in terms of diversity and inclusion, in terms of that media background, I'd probably be one of the, if you can. On the hand, you can count in your hand, because there are not many out there who've got that media background and communication background to be able to communicate and advocate in that space. And like you, as you said, there are people out there who are flying that diversity flag and inclusion flag, but they're not from a culturally diverse background either.
Yeah.
And they don't have the media background.
It's just having that understanding of how the media works. So I think advocates are doing a fantastic job at what they're doing, but sometimes some of the things that I'm hearing being said, I'm like, well, you need to understand from a marketing or media point of view why that's the way it is.
Yeah.
So that's one area that I'm really happy that I can make change in, is that I've got both of those. I wouldn't call it a skill set, but I've got that skill set that I can combine with disability to make a bit of a difference.
And so what other work are you doing other than being involved with MDA? Obviously you've stepped out of the advertising industry or an agency.
I still dabble in bits and pieces occasionally, and do consultancy work and that sort of thing. So I also work, even though it's not necessarily related to diversity and inclusion in media, do work with the healthcare industries and the health sector and those sorts of things as well. So they'll be doing all of their work with the doctors and nurses, but then they'll also have someone with lived experience to come in and present. Right. So a couple of committees and boards that I sit on with that work.
Mm. What do you what's your aspirations? What are you dreaming? What are some of your dreams, or what do you want to really, where to from here for you?
I would love to see, I'd like to play an active role in our media reflecting the society it serves. So in particular advertising, because advertising is such a powerful tool to shape public perceptions, community attitudes, those sorts of things. And at the moment it's full of stereotypes. So I would like to continue playing an active role in changing what's currently happening, because having that first-hand agency experience, and I've written thousands of scripts and helped produce hundreds of TV ads and radio ads and print ads, I know exactly what needs, how it can be tweaked and changed. And it's not rocket science. Inclusion is not rocket science in mainstream popular culture, especially advertising.
Mm. And how are you, you want to see that change, how are you doing it with the advertising? Obviously you have got some influence, obviously being part of the industry. Mm-hmm. Do you know of major players there that you think you can influence and shape how they actually, shape their narratives?
It's early days in terms of if I had the budget, I would love to fly around and present to every Australian advertising agency why they need inclusion and diversity, but not just the agencies. Brand managers and the people who sit in the marketing department, because the way to look at this is not just as a charity model, and it's a nice thing to do, but it's really bloody smart business. Neither of my degrees are in economics or finance, but you don't have to be a genius to know that 20% of the population who have spending power. I had a credit card when I was walking. I still have one now, but the difference when I go into a store, my value as a consumer is dropped dramatically because I have disabilities. We're missing a huge chunk of the market. I was on the TEDx stage at the end of last year giving a very short pitch about visibility for disability and why it's so important from a business perspective. I've spent enough time in boardrooms with people who don't really care about certain things. All they really focus on is the bottom line. Fair enough. That's their job. Fair enough. I'm not going to blame them. But it's a big bottom line that they're missing.
Yeah. So I suppose for that group of population, or the majority who sees the diversity inclusion topic or discussion. Mm-hmm. I was just mentioning to you before, I've got a friend of mine who said, Di, you've got to stop doing this left-wing stuff about feminism and diversity and inclusion.
Yeah.
And I thought, I don't think it is left-wing. Do you think it's left-wing?
No.
I don't know why people would put things into left or right.
No.
It's
common sense.
So I just thought, if you ensure that people are included, be it in the workplace, be it out there in the social sphere or economic sphere, then that will, as you said, contribute to the bottom line of any businesses who are, and businesses are the backbone of our society.
Absolutely. And if we look at how popular culture or something like that shapes community attitudes, so something as simple, and it's a really silly example, but putting, say, disabled models on catwalks or in magazines or in advertising, having that incidental inclusion trickles down into much bigger things.
Absolutely.
Like government policy and education and employment. So that's how that affects that.
Yep.
And slowly, if we have enough incidental inclusion, it does start to trickle down to affect the much bigger and far more important things.
And I think it will have an impact on the mental health and well-being of the next generation.
Oh, absolutely.
Who might be able to, if they don't have the disability, or if they have other form of disability, they might be able to relate to actually say, at least I feel there's somebody that looks like me, or they sound like me, or have been through that lived experience like me.
That's exactly right. I wrote about that in this article about the young girl that I mentioned before. Having inclusion in popular culture affects both sides. It affects the children with disabilities so they can see themselves represented, but it also helps her non-disabled classmates, for example, just see disability as a normal part of society and no big deal, really.
So what have you got planned for the next 12 months? Have you got any projects, that you've set your heart on?
Yes, I've got a really exciting project with Media Diversity Australia coming up. Working on that at the moment, and Brianna is the other disability affairs officer who is doing an enormous amount of work down here in Sydney, and something that's a little bit different, but Brisbane Fashion Week, Brisbane Fashion Festival, going to be a part of the Mercedes-Benz Fashion Festival with Carol Taylor, who's a quadriplegic designer, and she's asked me to model some clothes for her, but there's a few little things happening.
So for you, what would be your advice, tips to people, listening and watching our DAWNCast podcast, in terms of if they have a disability or if they have some unique characteristics that they're not part of the population? What is your advice to them?
Never be quiet, never stop advocating, because your voice matters, and the more noise that we can make around certain issues, the better. I put a post on Instagram only recently about the style of communication, because I had someone from a community different to my own who explained things to me and really took the time to educate and explain, instead of get on the soapbox and rant and rave and shame me, and to think about how you communicate your message. So getting on your soapbox and screaming angrily and sending off angry tweets probably isn't going to create as much change as you would like, but more importantly, to people out there in decision-making positions, be it a talent agent, a marketing director, a brand manager, include diversity, a diverse mix of people in your advertising, in your marketing, in whatever it is that you're doing, because not just because it's a decent thing to do and shows good corporate responsibility, but it will help your bottom line.
So, thanks so much, Lisa.
Thank you.
What a wonderful conversation, and really, it's like I said, at the beginning, it's very, very humbling, and I'm really honoured, to have you on DAWNCast. So, guys, hopefully you tune in and catch our DAWNCast podcast with Lisa Cox. So click on the link below. Well, did you enjoy that episode of DAWNCast? Well, I hope you did. At Dawn, the difference is you. So hit the subscribe button below and leave a comment and tell us what you would like to hear more of in the future.